Solana has had some major issues in the past few months. There's no denying it. And I'm not even talking about the wormhole hack, which I don't consider their fault. I'm talking about the more fundamental issues that's caused long outages and severe congestion. But are the critics right when they say that Solana is screwed? Or is it just FUD and Solana will be a-okay? Well, as a longtime Sol investor, I had to take a closer look. And surprisingly, as I did more research, my position slowly shifted from supporter to skeptic. But to understand my journey, we really have to go back to 2020 when Solana had its first major outage. They had just launched in March of 2020, and on December 4th, they had a multi-hour outage where the entire network stopped producing blocks. Some people jokingly said, why not just turn it off and turn it back on? Implying that Solana is centralized so they can actually do that. Well, they did coordinate with their validators to restart the network, and Solana started chugging along as if nothing happened. What's really interesting though is that the market seemed to not care at all about that incident, because the price of Sol rocketed 25x in the months afterwards. So I was like, okay, if no one else cares, then why should I? We can just write that off as a one-time ordeal. But fast forward almost 1 year to the end of 2021, and that's when things got interesting. I noticed way more issues pop up, back to back to back. And these were serious issues like long outages where nothing was working, or severe congestion where the network was working but at like 1% of its usual capacity. That's why I could no longer ignore the critics, and I had to take a closer look to see who was right. During my investigation, I found 3 to 4 separate incidents where the Solana network faced some sort of issue. The first one happened in early September, where they experienced performance degradation. The Solana status page tweeted that they were experiencing intermittent instability and that their engineers were investigating. Turns out this was short-lived, because less than 1 hour later, they said that the network had recovered, but that their engineers were still trying to diagnose the root cause. They never did tell us the root cause, but a lot of users did share their personal experience. One guy pointed out that Star Atlas, a super hot Solana project, had just launched their token offering that day, and that activity crushed the entire network. Another person chimed in saying that he tried a bunch of different wallets and services and none of them were working. So he concludes that it must have been a broader node or connectivity type of issue. Whatever the root cause was, this incident didn't seem to have that serious of consequences. So most of us were just like, meh, moving on. But in retrospect, this looked like a warning sign of things to come. But before we get there, a quick shout out to our video sponsors Futuur. They are a prediction market where you can trade on the outcome of real world events and earn crypto if you're right. For example, you can bet on the Oscars or the Brazilian election or whether Elon will take us to Mars. Futuur has hundreds of active markets based on any topic you could imagine, from politics to finance to sports, whatever. You can actually try them out for free by using their play money currency, or you can deposit crypto and put some skin in the game with your predictions. The best part is you can buy or sell your position at any time because they utilize an AMM just like Uniswap. And lastly, there are some geographical restrictions in terms of who can bet, but everyone can try them out using their play money feature. So if that sounds interesting to you, go check them out using my link below. Now, just 2 weeks after that early September incident, there was a massive outage for almost an entire day. This was kicked off by yet another token offering on Radium, this time by Grape Protocol. It looked like some people really wanted those tokens because they used bots to spam the crap out of the network. Some nodes reported receiving close to 300,000 transactions per second. In effect, it was a denial of service or DDoS attack on Solana. But just because the blockchain gets a flood of transactions doesn't mean it should break down or stop working, right? So what really happened here? Well, Jump Crypto wrote a really detailed post-mortem about this incident that was fascinating. I'll leave you a link below in case you want to read it. But essentially there were a handful of bugs and curious design choices that caused a cascade of problems. Like first, some bots were accidentally allowed to write lock global accounts, which meant that all of their transactions had to be processed one by one instead of in parallel. Second, the forwarding behavior of nodes made things even worse, because there's no concept of a transaction mempool for Solana, like there is in Bitcoin/Ethereum. Instead, nodes forward transactions to the current leader to get processed. And this behavior just makes the spam even worse. Third, the retry behavior of certain apps or nodes didn't help either, because they assumed that it was their own issue rather than something wrong with the network. So they would resend failed transactions over and over, thus contributing to the flood of transactions. Fourth, Solana does their consensus voting with on-chain transactions, which is actually quite different from most other blockchains. So when those transactions couldn't be processed in time, that led to a loss of consensus across the network. And finally, fifth, all of these issues combined caused some validators to run out of memory, because the network issues caused their nodes to keep on forking, and they had to keep track of all the possible states in their memory. So some of them who didn't buy the absolute best hardware equipment ran out of memory during that ordeal. Now, the thing with these 5 problems is that if just one of them happened at a time, it wouldn't have been that bad. But because they all happened and kind of chained together, it led to pretty much the worst case scenario. And this time, the community reaction was way worse, and many people were tweeting their frustrations with the outage. Even Dr. Gavin Wood from Polkadot chimed in with his disapproval. Some supporters of Solana even started asking to add more fees to prevent the spam, but Solana CEO Anatoly Yakovenko clarified that this was, quote, a resource exhaustion prior to the stage where fees can be applied. Either way, for these specific problems, there were simple fixes that the Solana team identified. So after a couple of restarts, they were able to get the network up and running again. So the coast was clear, right? Well, not so fast, because these fixes were actually just low-hanging fruit fixes, and not the long-term fixes that tackle the root issue. This is super important to keep in mind, because this lack of a long-term fix is going to rear its ugly head again later on. Now, fast forward a few months to January, and things started acting up again. Users reported that Solana was down and suspected that they were facing a DDoS attack. Anatoly responded that it was just congestion due to high compute transactions not being handled properly. Those transactions were taking a long time to execute due to a bug, so that had the effect of decreasing the network throughput significantly. They actually already had a fix for this bug, but only 15% of the validators had upgraded to that version, so it wasn't live across the network yet. That's why Anatoly said, quote, it's not a DDoS, just pain of getting a new runtime commercialized. But he also noted that that fix was only a quick bandage, and the deeper issue wouldn't be addressed until the next major node version 1.9 was released. Unfortunately, that did not come soon enough, because in late January, things took a turn for the worse. Solana faced the same degradation issues, but this time it was a different domino that kicked everything off. Tomas Eminger explained it best in his thread that the crypto markets dropped heavily that day. So people who were borrowing from DeFi lending protocols like Solend now had positions that were underwater. This means they had to deposit more coins in order to get back over the allowed collateralization ratio. But because the network was congested, they spammed transactions as much as possible and prayed that some of them would go through to save their positions. This rapid clicking from Solana DeFi users meant that a lot of duplicate transactions were getting sent to validators. But wait, there's more, because arbitragers also wanted a piece of this action. If they were fast enough, they could help these protocols perform liquidations and take a juicy 5% cut in the process. So to maximize their chance of getting in the next block, these arbitragers would use bots to send a crap ton of transactions. And since they know which validators would get chosen next, they could target those specifically with a flood of transactions. So this was really an issue of duplicate transactions, because the largest validators were getting over 500,000 duplicate packets per second, which completely wrecked their usual process of removing duplicates before processing the rest of the transactions. This time the impact was way worse though, because many users lost money when their positions got liquidated, from no fault of their own. I was scrolling through Twitter and saw a bunch of angry tweets like this one demanding that someone answer for his loss of money. I think Larry Cermak put it best when he wrote, quote, the main issue in the last few days was that you couldn't get transactions through when you needed it the most. If I get liquidated because I can't top up my position, it's hard to see me trusting it again for those types of transactions. Unfortunately for me, this was the straw that broke the camel's back, because I had seen enough and I could no longer defend Solana after everything that had happened. It's not only me, Hana on Twitter wrote that the first few times Solana went down wasn't that bad, but when it happens regularly, now that is concerning. I just don't think it's smart to use or invest in Solana until these problems stop happening. And you know what's funny? One of the fixes that Anatoly proposed is something very similar to a fee market, which is what Ethereum had all along. And ETH maxis had been saying that this was needed. But if we take a step back, I think all the hand waving and semantics It's just confusing and doesn't even matter. Because at the end of the day, Solana has gone down multiple times, it has caused real damage to users, and they don't yet have a long-term fix that inspires confidence. So when people write that they're selling all their SOL, I can't blame them. I've cut my personal position as well since this all started. My conclusion after all this research is that not all the criticism against Solana is accurate, but they do deserve some for sure. And one common response that I hear from supporters is that the network is still in beta, so give them some slack. But I don't really like that excuse because they have billions of dollars in the ecosystem, and they don't even have a concrete plan of when they will be out of beta. What do you think though? Do you agree with my conclusion? Or do you think I fell for the FUD? In which case, please explain down below. But I think the most important question to ask is whether the whales will lose confidence in Solana as well. If they do, SOL could be in a world of trouble. After all, VCs and whales do own a huge chunk of the SOL supply, as I break down here in this video. Give that a watch to see how one of my price predictions is actually really close to coming true. Anyways, I'll see you on the next one, and cheers!